Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, sitting in for Fit Me OK, and you are in the stream. Today, growing up transgender, what it means for families, and is there such a thing as too young to decide when it comes to choosing your gender? Our digital producer, Malika Blau, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, what say you?
I think this is going to be a learning experience for many members of our community. They have a lot of questions for the trans community. I want to give us a little taste of what some of them look like. This one is from Audi on Twitter, who asked, how do transgender men and women cope with school, with work and family life, the pressure and the expectations of family and friends? We'll get into all of that in today's show. And of course, for those of you at home, if you have your own questions or comments, want to join the conversation, do so with hashtag AJStream.
With us on set is Sarah Schmidt, a mother to a transgender son. We'll be speaking with you in just a moment. Thanks for being here today. All right, now look, we all know growing up is difficult, right? But it can be really tough for transgender youth. And just how tough recently came to our attention through YouTube and trans teen bloggers. Here, listen to this.
Around 7th grade is when puberty hit and certain things started forming and certain things started happening. And it just didn't seem right. I was really confused. I identified with the boys.
As children begin to express their gender identity at really very early ages, parents are faced with tough questions. How do they allow their children to express themselves? And as they reach puberty, do parents allow medical intervention? Self-discovery is often difficult for trans youth and their parents, and this is not only true in the West, but internationally as well, as transgender people become more visible. Now, here to help us understand the many facets of this discussion, we are joined in New York by Gina Rosero, the founder of Gender Proud and a model. Via Skype in Vermont, Skylar Kurgel, who you just saw there, and that intro video, that was Skylar. He is a trans vlogger, or the blogger and a media activist. And we're also joined by Dr. Daniel Schumer, an endocrinologist fellow at Boston Children's Hospital. All right, now look, I actually want to begin today with the community because we've already received some pushback just in the way we framed the question and the tease for the show, right, Malika?
Definitely. People were concerned about how we were going to address such a sensitive topic. So, Skylar, I want to pull up two tweets from someone who had some of those concerns. This is from Khadija. She says, why do we force binary gender IDs, and that's the strict roles of men and women, male and female, on our children? What's wrong with society that we feel the absolute need to do that? She continues saying, there's such scientifically proven gender diversity. I would prefer we ask, should doctors choose a person's sex at birth? So Skylar, can you explain to us why it's important to break down those strict gender binary or strict gender roles for you?
Absolutely. I think it's important to first understand the difference between sex and gender because sex is biology and gender is one's identity. Culturally in society, gender and gender roles differ between every single culture. So I think they were created based mainly off of what people assumed that biological females would be able to do and what biological males would be able to do. So the male masculine warrior versus the female who would give birth and take care of the children. I think they were centered around that, and just recently has this idea of gender identity and gender variance come into the conversation. So I would say that the only reason right now I can see why society is like this is because it hasn't been brought up for a long time.
Yeah, the idea of gender variance. But I think what we're talking about today ends up becoming kind of a gender binary because we're talking about boys going from girls or male to female and female to male, right? Mm-hmm. But as a father, I have 4 kids. Dr. Schumer, I remember kind of the earliest experience of my kids asking about boy and girl, and it was like in the bathtub, right? And I would just explain, well, she's a girl because she has a vagina, he's a boy because he has a penis. Was I right on that, or am I wrong on that definition? What is it that makes someone a boy and another person a girl?
Well, it starts even before the child's born with the chromosomes, with the chromosomes telling the gonads whether to become ovaries or testes, and those ovaries and testes making different amounts of different kinds of hormones, testosterones and estrogens. And it's true that most people that have XY chromosomes and their gonads are testes that make testosterone have a male gender identity, and most XX chromosome, folks that have ovaries that make more estrogen have a female gender identity. There's certainly variation there, and we're just kind of catching up to that variation now.
Gina, I know that you've actually experienced this in your life. Can you talk to us what it's like to be born into one gender, but to know on some deep level that you're another gender, and then how that manifested itself in your life?
Yeah, it's funny because I when I tell this story, like I knew when I was 5 years old. I mean, I remember that very clear moment. I was 5 years old and I was, in the Philippines, and I would walk around our house with the T-shirt draped, on my head and on my back. And I remember my mom asking me, how come I always wear that T-shirt in my head? And I just told her, Mom, this is my hair. I'm a girl. I knew at that very early age how to express myself in that sense, and that's very early. And I think there's a lot more research now, and there's a lot more documentaries even that you could see online that actually testify on the fact that more children now are actually expressing a different gender assignment that they were assigned. So I mean, I think having that very early expression helped me to just fully express myself to my parents, and I think also my parents have been very supportive and all throughout the process, just allowing me to just express myself.
Gina, you're a fashion model in New York. Can you give us a little bit more of your story, how you went from the Philippines to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I was born and grew up in the Philippines, and in the Philippines it's the culture around transgender, specifically transgender women, it's celebrated. This is a long history in Asian cultures that celebrates the fluid mystery of gender. There is Buddhist goddess of compassion, Guanyin. There is a Hindu Hijra goddess, Bahucharamata, that it's really are revered towards the fluidity of gender. They're celebrated for both the masculine and feminine, and it translates to the current contemporary culture in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, there's a fiesta celebration. So almost every 2 weeks, there's a fiesta celebration somewhere in the 7,000 islands in the Philippines. And during those fiesta, there's a pageant specifically for transgender women. So at 15, I was discovered by a beauty pageant manager, and I started joining beauty pageant for transgender women. There's even a TV show, a variety show, where they had a beauty pageant on national TV. So it's people in the Philippines and in Asian cultures mostly, people are very exposed to this, but it's not politically recognized, meaning that there's no law that would allow people specifically to change name and gender marker on their documents. So when I moved to United States in 2001, my mom moved to United States in 1995. 2001, she gave me a call and said, your green card petition came through, and you could now move to United States. I resisted it at first because I was young and I was having fun in the Philippines. But then she came back to me 2 weeks later saying, there's a law in the United States that would allow you to change name and gender marker. All right, that's what I wanted in my life. I made the decision to move to San Francisco in 2001. But when I moved to San Francisco, I've observed this very rigid construct of observation about gender binary. But somehow there was a law that allowed me to change my name and gender marker. So I observed this big global paradox from my experience. And then after I've changed my name and gender marker, I moved to New York City in 2005 and bought that one-way ticket. I wanted to become a model. After I changed my name and gender marker in my documents, I felt like I could now live my dream. I felt validated. I felt a sense of, it made sense who I am, how I'm presenting myself. So I moved to New York in 2005, and I was discovered to become a model. So
we were actually showing some of your modeling pictures while you were talking, and they're really stunning. They're absolutely beautiful photos.
Thank you.
And it's interesting to hear the way this issue is perceived around the world. I'm going to show you something I have on my screen here. It shows kind of where in the world what you have to do to change your gender laws. And so you see that the countries in the left there require surgery, and then the ones in the middle no surgery, and then other, Canada and the United States. One of the interesting things is, though, in the require surgery is Iran. Iran is second only to Thailand in the number of operations performed there. And I think a lot of people might find that surprising, depending on what you assume about Iran. Sarah, how do you know when you're dealing with a child? Like, look, one of my sons wants to be Dora for 2 weeks, Dora the Explorer, which is a show in America about a girl named Dora. But how do you know this isn't something that's just going to pass at some point in a couple of weeks?
Well, our child, from the time he could talk, told us that we were wrong, that he had, he was really a boy, that we were confused.
From the time he could talk?
From the time he could talk. His very earliest
Well, how do you
sentences were,
communicate
I'm
that
a boy.
I'm a boy.
I'm a boy. And we would say, no, you're a girl.
How do you think he knew he was a boy at the time?
I've been
How
reading up on it.
How does he know what a boy or girl is at the time?
And even at 12 months, children begin to distinguish differences between male and female. And so by the time they're able to verbalize, some children are able to identify, this is what I am. And ironically, at 2, when I said I'm a girl, nobody questioned me. Nobody asked how I could possibly know that as a little girl, because it matched what they expected me to hear. So we did think our child was confused, and we waited for it to pass, and we waited for it to pass. And 2.5 years later, when he was 4.5 and it hadn't passed, we knew that it wasn't going to, go away. And it was becoming enough of a difficulty and a struggle in his life that we decided to go ahead and allow him to transition and live as a boy. And a lot of the problems that he was having at that point in time went away once he transitioned to living as a boy.
And what was that transition like? What does that mean, transition to living as a boy?
Well, the beauty of transitioning before you hit puberty is that all of the changes can be changed back. So he changed his clothing. We began to shop in the boys department, buy superhero underwear, boys jeans, sneakers with Spider-Man on them, the contemporary things that most of the boys in our culture like. And
does he go to public school in Maryland?
He does not.
Okay.
We are actually going to transition him next year to public school.
To public school? Are you worried at all about how they accept that?
Different areas are more accepting than others, but it is something that we do intend to address. We're going to go in before he starts school and make sure that the administration is going to be supportive of him and his needs.
Thank you for that.
Wow.
It's so important to have supportive parents. I mean, it's being such expressing yourself differently at such a young age could be very lonely for most people, even at 7 or 8, where you're just trying to figure out. And having supportive parents, it's so important. It is so important, and it's not the case for everybody, but really just to listen to the kid and what the kid is trying to express is so important.
And speaking of listening to kids, we actually got a video comment from a mother of a child going through this, and it's interesting. She wanted to participate in this conversation, but she did not feel comfortable sharing her voice, sharing her face, So we have this video comment. We've shielded her identity. Have a listen.
When my child was 9, she suddenly became distraught to the point of becoming suicidal. Psychiatrists, who had never worked with transgender kids before, told us that she had a serious lifelong mental illness. Once her doctors discovered that she'd actually started puberty, she was put on hormone blockers. Now at 14, she has great friends and does well in school and musical theater. Medical intervention was a life and death decision for us that we have never regretted.
So Dr. Schumer, she mentions a life and death decision. She says she hasn't regretted, but there are people online wondering when is too young, when is the time appropriate? There's a Facebook comment here from Jack. He says this is a complex issue. If a person is old enough to express their own gender identity, given a choice, which most of us are not, he mentions, then they are old enough to decide. When is someone old enough to decide, Dr. Schumer?
Well, first I want to second the props to Sarah on supporting her child unconditionally. I think that's, before we start talking about medical decisions, the most important thing. With respect to medications, as Sarah pointed out, prior to puberty, there's not much to decide. The body's not making any puberty hormones, so there's no hormones to consider blocking and no hormones to consider giving. But once puberty starts and the child has persisting gender dysphoria or feelings of distress about their gender, those feelings can start to feel a lot worse as all of a sudden the body's starting to make these changes that seem very foreign to the child. So around age 10 or 11, when puberty tends to start, most providers feel that that's too young for a child to make decisions that will cause irreversible changes, especially changes in things like fertility potential. The Endocrine Society recommends an alternative approach where you can pause puberty with medications to allow time for the child to mature and explore their gender identity without using medications that would cause irreversible changes. And those medications are what people call blockers. Then at around age 15, 16, the child, family, and the doctor can readdress the question about starting cross-sex hormones which would lead to some irreversible changes. And then using that protocol, blocking puberty, and then introducing cross-sex hormones later on, the child would never be exposed to the unwanted hormones of their biologic gender, but only exposed to the hormones of their affirmed gender, or the gender they identify with.
Hey, Skylar, can you tell us what it was like for you to go through puberty?
Puberty was terrifying for me. I thought I was going to follow my older brother. I saw him shooting up. I saw him getting acne and everything, his voice dropping, the Adam's apple. And when puberty hit for me, I was very confused and very lost, because thankfully up until that point, my parents treated me in an androgynous sort of way. They didn't super gender me, and people would mistake me for a boy, and that felt right. But once puberty hit, that mistaking went away, and I felt very, very uncomfortable, and I call that dysphoria.
I wanted to add a couple of things. One is that my child was expressing gender dysphoria at age 4. He would stand in the bathroom at bath time and scream, "I hate my body." Within a year of transitioning, that completely went away, and he is happy now to run around the house naked, take baths. It's no longer an issue.
You've got a few years before he hits puberty.
Yes.
Are you going through the decision process now about whether to use hormone blockers to hold off puberty?
My feeling was that female puberty is so traumatic when you're in the correct body. I can't imagine going through it in the wrong body. And so I am wholeheartedly in support as he gets closer to puberty. If he expresses a desire to be on the blockers, then we will go forward with that. And we are going to start meeting. But how can an 11 or a 12-year-old understand the risk involved with going on a medication like that? I don't know that he can understand all of it, but he certainly can make very informed decisions. And most children, if they're willing to go through that and suffer that kind of pain, those shots and all of that, obviously it's very important to them.
Dr. Schumer, what would you say to a parent in Sarah's situation here?
You know, I think that she's doing an amazing job listening to her child, and right now is a time to celebrate just being a kid. And puberty is probably right around the corner, and you'll be very equipped for that, hopefully with your pediatrician and other providers that can help make decisions about what comes next. But
and
I
Skylar,
think that...
please go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Schumer.
But I think that I was just going to say that, you know, in the medical community, we talk about do no harm, and you know, a lot of people worry about these, you know, are we doing harm by introducing these medications to change genders in childhood? I think from people in the transgender field, we feel that doing nothing would be harmful, because feelings of gender dysphoria get worse during puberty, and living in the wrong gender is harmful.
And speaking of those feelings getting worse, you know, Skylar, we're talking about people who have the support of family members, support of mothers like Sarah. The same goes with Gina's mother. But what about those who don't have that support, and those who don't have the money to go ahead with things like surgery? We got a tweet here from Amelia who says, "I started getting hormones illicitly on my own because I couldn't get real care. The heart was fine. Economic costs and isolation is what hurt." So Skylar, you do a vlog, as Josh mentioned earlier, and you're speaking to YouTube, you are speaking to the world. Do you hear back from people like Amelia who don't have that same support system?
Absolutely. And at first I always said, hey, don't go and get testosterone like illegally or not through a medical provider. But then when I realized, when I lost my health insurance, how expensive my hormone therapy is, I was like, absolutely, the access to these resources, it's really hard. Economically, it's really hard. And without family support, it's impossible to get on hormone blockers. It's impossible to do anything until one is legally of age. So that's really difficult.
It is. I remember, you know, growing up in the Philippines, we didn't have access to information. You know, it's really all this. This is just what it was. You know,
Gina, you were self-medicating at times, weren't you? Can you tell us what that is?
I was. So, I mean, when I started joining Beauty Pageant at 15, I felt like, oh, I really needed to really fully come to terms that this is really who I am. And that comes with that with, you know, my friends were taking hormones. They said that's what you're supposed to do. So I started taking hormones. I started self-medicating. That's what I knew at that time. There was no information in the Philippines, and it's still lacking. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But because there's just a trusted network of friends, is it the wrong way to do? I don't know, but that's certainly what we did.
Hey, Gina, just
That's
so I
what we
understand,
had.
by self-medicating, you were just taking hormone pills without any kind of like doctor telling you how much or how many?
Yeah, that's what we did. I mean, we could buy it over the counter, you know, birth control pills, and my friend is doing it. I wanted to do it. My community was doing it, so we were doing it, and because, you know, people wanted to look a certain way, and people told me to do this certain way, and I wanted to become a certain woman that I wanted to become, and because my friends were doing it, I wanted to do it. And unfortunately, I think there really needs, and I think I sort of want to get into the question, is like the information. How is this information being shared in a leveraged way? Because there's a lack of information out there on what is the process, especially in third world countries like the Philippines and many other countries.
Just to jump in real quick, you know, I think that this point that's been brought up about taking unprescribed medications is really at the crux of this whole issue when you know these medications can be dangerous. And when this is an evolving topic that insurance companies need to catch up to. Right now, you know, it's really tough for families without means to afford proper care for their children, and this needs to evolve.
Skylar, I only have a couple minutes left here, but in America, you know that this issue gets thrown in with LBGT, so lesbian, bi, gay, and transgender, and is there a problem with that?
I'm not sure. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and what I've realized is that the acronym of LGBT and all that follow after it refers to a gender and sexual minority. That's the way that I see it, and I think that it's confusing because when I first told people I was transgender, they were like, well, why aren't you just a lesbian? Not realizing that a lesbian is a woman who's attracted to women, and gender identity is completely different than who I love. So I think it's important to know the difference. I can somewhat understand why the T is on there because both are fighting for recognition, both are fighting for acceptance medically and socially. So I can see that being strong, but I do think it's important to realize it's gender and sexual minorities, not just the sexual orientation acronym.
Right, and Josh, you know, we got this video comment in from Dove. She's a parent, and I want to play this for you, Sarah. We have about a minute left, but I'd like you to listen to this, and this is her prescription for what to do about what we're talking about. Have a listen.
Okay.
Hi, Dove Presnall of Survivors Truths and the Trans You Speak project here. And I'd just like to introduce the idea that there really is no time that's too early to start talking about the gender spectrum. We feel the need to put our kids in a box, that they're male or female, they're boy or girl, but we can really easily open up conversation about the range of gender expression, whether we think our kids are trans or not.
You're opening up those conversations, right?
Yes, we are. What we tell our child is we love him whether he's a boy or a girl, and that if any at time his feelings change or he feels more like a girl, that we are open to that. We've transitioned once, we can do it again. It's not a big deal to us. It's his expression.
I actually have to transition us now from the live TV show, the stream, to the online post show. So look, I know you're into this, so go to your computers if you're not there already. Go to stream.aljazeera.com and follow along this conversation. It's going to happen for a few more minutes after this. Now, on the next show tomorrow in Kenya, did you know marrying multiple women without a wife's consent is a signature away from becoming legal? Is marriage there becoming a man's world is the question that we ask tomorrow. You won't want to miss that one. And until then, we'll see you online. All right, welcome back to the Post Show, where we're talking about the issues of coming out as transgender at an early age. And I just want to jump back into the discussion. Gina, let's go to you. Can you tell me what it means to live in stealth? And then I'm also curious, at what point in a relationship do you have to come out and tell someone, you know, I guess your history with it? You know, I mean, like, you're very attractive, you meet a guy in a coffee shop. At what point do you need to let him know your history?
Well, it's a very private matter. So I do a lot of mentorship as well to a lot of young trans women, and this is one of those big questions that comes up. And for me, you know, sharing something that, you know, that is a part of you is always very important. You know, I tell them, like, you don't have the responsibility to tell them right away at the very first date, second date. The moment you find you feel that there is a potential with this person, a guy or a girl, you know, that's when you come in and you want to have a sit-down conversation and just to properly share. It's not a matter of disclosing, oh, this is what I've gone through, please accept me. No, this is what I've gone through. This is what made me who I am. What do you think? It's as simple as that. Because, you know, most of the time in society, you know, especially in the media, you know, media tells, you know, a lot of, especially young trans women, that what you are is wrong. And it's not. This is who you are. The journey that you went through made you who you are as a strong person that you are, and the obstacles that you've gone through. So when you come into that situation when you needed to really just share that, it just is, you know, try to take out as much fear out of it, as much as it's fearful, just share the full truth of it, because this is what made you who you are.
Skylar, I see you nodding along. Jump in.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it too, Gina. And for me, when I disclosed my transgender past to a potential romantic partner, I like to just make it not a big deal, because it's just a part of who I've become. And typically I'll bring it up at a point where maybe we're talking about childhood or something, and I'll be like, well, you know what, like, this could be a good time to mention, like, you know, I was raised as a girl, and so this is what made me me. But the most important thing is right now and being happy and confident. And absolutely, I agree.
Sarah,
you have to be proud of it. You know, it's a very difficult journey, and I think because of that, and it's just a society as well. It's just you're always bombarded by these messages that what you are is wrong.
When you're talking about society and you're talking about putting your son into public school next year, are you worried about not just the school, but how society around him is going to respond?
We've lived very openly up till this point, and we've been met with so much love and so much support from our community. And we go back and forth on whether our child should start public school stealth. Should he not disclose to other people? And at what point do they have a right to know? Is it even their business? But I don't ever want to teach him to be ashamed of who he is. And so that's more my concern with telling him he can't tell people, is I don't want him to be ashamed. He is who he is.
So Skylar, we know bullying is a huge issue in America today. Was there any risk with you coming out the way you did in such a public way on YouTube with your video blog? And what advice would you give to Sarah as they're looking at integrating into a public school system and dealing with this question of stealth or not?
Absolutely. So, Sarah, I've got to say that that's really amazing that you don't want him to ever be ashamed. So forcing him to be stealth is absolutely, you know, not the right choice in that way. And for me, actually, what happened was I put myself out on the internet so publicly about 7 months before I entered my freshman year of college. When I entered college, I wanted to live as stealth, and I realized that I began to feel like it was something I was ashamed of being trans. And so it took me about through the first year of college, and also I was so public on the internet, so I had someone comment on a video being like, oh, I see you around campus, and I was just horrified. I was like, oh no, what if they say something my friends don't know? I don't want my friends to find out without me telling them. So I made the choice to fully come out again after living stealth, which was an interesting experience, but I feel really happy that I felt comfortable in my community to be out and proud. There definitely was a fear at first that I would be bullied in a college environment, no friends around yet, no parents around that supported me. So I definitely feared it. I feared going into the men's bathroom. I feared going into the men's locker room. I feared going to the gym. So I think that me just being out and putting it out there as if, hey, it's not a big deal, it's not a problem, and thankfully it went really well for me.
Josh, it's fantastic that you asked that. We did just get a tweet in from someone saying, how do parents deal with transgendered kids who have to deal with that bullying in school? Skylar, you were talking about that fear. Now, there's a tweet here I'm going to bring up. This is from Micah, who says, the medical system pathologizes trans youth and wants them to fall within binary gender norms. So you already talked about some of the fears going into the locker room, going into schools, but what about going into the hospital, that process of transitioning? Was there fear involved with that? I know you told our producers ahead of the show that the day that you had surgery was the best day of your life?
Yes, it was. It was. The day I had top surgery, which was a double mastectomy, was the best day of my life. And I felt absolutely amazing. I thankfully went to a plastic surgeon who was totally accepting of being trans. That's why I chose her. But all of my medical experiences before I began my medical transition, like for instance going in an ambulance and presenting as male but having all of my IDs read female, and the conversation was not about, oh, am I going to lose my eye because I just got hit in the face? It was more about, are you a boy or a girl? And I was like, that's not important right now. My eye is falling out of my face. So it's hit or miss for me in all of my experiences medically, even now. Some providers are so accepting and so wonderful, others are not. And I think what it has to do is with education. And so education can help bring it into the conversation, can help. It can help ease bullying and easing fears of bathrooms. Gender neutral bathrooms definitely can help as well.
Dr. Schumer, there's a long-term study of young children with gender dysphoria where they found only about 15% continue to have this feeling as adolescents and adults. Are there side effects that Sarah should be worried about if they use the hormone blockers and things change for her child later on?
When researchers have talked to adults about what point in their life did they feel a sense that their gender identity was really permanent, they identify early puberty as a really important time, so that if someone's in early puberty that's having a transgender identity, that's very, very likely to persist into the future. With younger kids, and for kids like Sarah's child, it's a little less certain. However, Sarah mentioned beautifully that the family is prepared for what happens at puberty and is prepared to be fluid about gender as things move forward. So medical providers only use hormones in people in early puberty because that's the time when they would be of benefit, but also that's the time when these gender identity ideas seem to become sort of locked in and more permanent.
Are there longitudinal studies, though, that show the effect on fertility later on if people want to switch back?
So the nice thing about the puberty blockers is that once you take away the medication, puberty then resumes. And so the puberty blockers are considered a non-permanent intervention. On the other hand, once you start introducing cross-sex hormones, then there can be potential fertility differences.
The community, the stream community, Malika, I think challenged the way we were presenting this in a gender binary way, which I have to say I think I'm probably less sensitive to because this wasn't on my radar as much. I wonder if in the way we discussed it today, if they found it offensive or not. Have you gotten any kind of sense from tweets coming in if we lived up to their low expectations?
I don't think people found the conversation offensive. I think that there were a lot of questions answered for those who were not familiar with the community, and for those who are part of the trans community, they're also tweeting in. I want to read this tweet from Khadija, who I opened up with, and she says, it's a good ending from the community. She says, kids transition because they have to. Psychologists are more aware of this every year. The only trauma is from society's rejection. So here's hoping that today's show may negate some of that rejection.
Yeah.
It's very important. I mean, it's my mom is a teacher for 25 years. Like now that I am coming into this, building gender proud and what I'm doing about it, like what you were saying about like the full expression and the education around it, I consider myself now as an educator. Like when I go in situations, people would ask me questions, and as long as I know the questions are, and I've been around that, I feel that if it's being offensive, I know how to deflect that. But I'm an educator now. When I come into the station, as long as it's for the sake of curiosity and knowledge, ask me anything. Let's have a conversation. Conversations need to be had. And people sometimes disagree on things, but conversation is so crucial to open up because there's just so many layers, and it's especially just specifically in the Western world, there's just a lot of this very rigid gender binary construct. But it needs to be changed.
Gina,
we need to go.
Where can people find Gender Proud?
It's genderproud.com. We just launched this past Monday, and I gave a TED Talk last week and received about 500,000 views already. And it's.
Is that right? 500,000 views on that TED Talk?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, well, look, I got to wrap this up. Gina, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Skylar as well, Dr. Schumer, all of you for taking the time, and not just taking the time, but being really honest. And Sarah, your son, you actually changed his name into, is it Jake?
Yes, we legally changed his name.
So let me know, hit us back at the stream on Facebook or Twitter, or I'm Josh Rushing on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to know what Jake thought about the show today.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks for being with us.
Thank
I appreciate it. Now, in tomorrow's show, we're talking about Kenya, where marrying multiple women without the wife's consent is a signature away from becoming legal. Is marriage there becoming a man's world? You won't want to miss that one.